No, don't turn him away. He's my husband.
Sarah? It's you? I thought you were.
I'm here now. We'll be all right. Together.
By the time they told him to leave, his daughter had already vomited blood into his shirt. It wasn't a lot at first, just a dark splash against the faded blue cotton, warm and terrifying and wrong. But when 8-year-old Sophie looked up at him, with her lips trembling, and whispered, "Daddy, I'm cold," something inside Daniel Mercer dropped so hard it felt physical, like an elevator cable snapping in his chest. He tightened his arms around her and ran through the sliding glass doors of St. Catherine's Medical Tower like a man outrunning fire. The lobby was all polished marble and soft lighting and expensive silence. A piano recording floated somewhere overhead. The place didn't look like a hospital. It looked like the kind of building where terrible news was delivered gently, with fresh flowers in the corner, and men in tailored suits pretending money could soften death. Daniel didn't belong in that kind of light. His boots were wet from the rain. His hoodie had bleach marks on one sleeve from the diner kitchen. Sophie's small body shook against him, and her breath came in short, sharp pulls that made him move faster. "Please," he said at the front desk, not even stopping long enough to catch his breath. "My daughter needs help. She's bleeding. Please." The woman behind the desk looked up, startled, then trained, professionally calm, professionally distant. Her eyes flicked over Sophie, then over Daniel's clothes, then to the puddle collecting at his feet. "Sir, the emergency unit is for registered patients and direct referrals only." Daniel blinked at her like he hadn't understood the language. "What?" "You need to go to County General for emergency walk-in cases." "She's bleeding." "I understand, but—" "No, I don't think you do." His voice cracked so hard it almost disappeared. "She's 8. She has been throwing up since morning. I called everywhere. County said 6-hour wait. A clinic set us here because she started passing out in the car. Please, just get a doctor." The woman's face tightened, not with cruelty exactly, but with procedure. And sometimes procedure was colder than cruelty because it didn't even bother to hate you. "Sir, I need you to lower your voice." Sophie whimpered. Daniel shifted her higher against his chest and tried again, quieter this time, because desperation had already started sanding down his pride. "She had surgery here 2 years ago," he said. "Her records might be in the system. Sophie Mercer. Please, please just look." The woman typed. Her nails were perfect, pale pink, soft clicking sounds. Then she frowned. "I'm not seeing active coverage." "I know. I lost the private plan months ago." "Then I'm sorry, sir, but—" A security guard had already begun walking toward him. Daniel turned and stared at the man coming across the lobby. Broad shoulders, clipped steps, radio at his belt. He couldn't believe this was happening. Not fully. Some part of him still expected a doctor to appear from nowhere and say it had all been a misunderstanding, that they would take Sophie upstairs, that the world had not yet become this ugly. Instead, the guard stopped a few feet away and gave him the look people reserved for trouble before it started. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step outside." Sophie made a small sound then, barely more than a breath. Daniel looked down. Her eyes were rolling. Something broke loose in him. "No." He stepped back, clutching her tighter. "No, I'm not leaving. She needs a doctor." "Sir." "I said no!" Heads turned. A couple near the elevators stopped pretending not to stare. Somewhere behind him, the front desk woman said, "Call administration." Sophie's head lolled against his shoulder. Daniel dropped to his knees right there on the polished floor. That was the part he would remember later. Not the shouting, not the humiliation, not even the fear. It was the moment his knees hit the marble and he realized there was nothing left between dignity and survival. No wall, no line, no version of himself still standing. He pressed a shaking hand to Sophie's cheek. "Baby," he whispered. "Soph, stay with me. Look at Daddy. Come on, look at me." Her lashes fluttered. He could feel people watching, judging, avoiding, memorizing just enough of the scene to tell someone about it over dinner. And then, from the far end of the lobby, a voice rang out so sharp and shattered that the entire room seemed to stop breathing. "Daniel?" Daniel looked up. At first, he thought stress was playing tricks on him because the man standing near the private elevator belonged to another life, to another city almost, another version of pain. Tall, black overcoat, hair neatly swept back, though now slightly disordered as if he'd run a hand through it too many times. The face from magazine covers and business channels and giant screens outside financial conventions. The one people associated with billion-dollar mergers and impossible calm. Adrian Vale, CEO of Vale Health Systems, and the man Daniel had not seen in 7 years. For one stunned second, nobody moved. Then Adrian's eyes dropped to the child in Daniel's arms, to the blood on Daniel's shirt, and whatever carefully composed version of him the world knew vanished in an instant. He ran. Not hurried, not brisk. Ran. The entire lobby watched the CEO of the hospital chain bolt across polished marble like a man whose soul had just been dragged out of his body. "Move!" Adrian shouted at the security guard, and there was such raw panic in his voice that the man stumbled backward before he could even think. Adrian dropped beside Daniel so fast, one knee hit the floor hard enough to echo. "What happened?" he asked, but he was already reaching for Sophie, his hands trembling. "Sophie, sweetheart, can you hear me? Daniel, what happened?" Daniel could only stare at him. Adrian looked up, wild-eyed, at the front desk. "Why is no one helping them?" The woman behind the counter stood frozen. He wasn't cleared for—" Adrian rose halfway, fury and grief colliding on his face. "He is my husband!" Silence. It spread through the lobby like broken glass. The guard's mouth actually fell open. The receptionist went pale. Somewhere near the elevators, someone gasped. Daniel felt the world tilt. Husband. The word hit harder than it should have, because legally, technically, heartbreakingly, it was true. Adrian turned back instantly, all of that public explosion narrowing into something far more private and far more devastating. He touched Daniel's face once, just once, like he was confirming he was real. Then he shouted, "Get pediatric GI, trauma, and Dr. Hahn down here now! Now!" Everything moved after that. Doors opened, shoes pounded, nurses arrived with a gurney. Someone eased Sophie from Daniel's arms while he fought the instinct to hold on, because for 8 years she had been the only person on earth he never let fall. "It's okay," Adrian said, though his own voice was breaking. "Go with her. Stay with her." Daniel stood on unsteady legs and followed as they rushed Sophie toward the elevators. He barely noticed Adrian beside him, barking orders into the air like a man trying to command fate itself. Inside the elevator, with fluorescent lights overhead and Sophie small and pale under 2 white blankets, Daniel finally found his voice. "You don't get to do this." Adrian looked at him. Daniel laughed once, but it sounded ugly. 7 years. 7 years, Adrian. And now you're here saying, husband, like it means something? The doors slid open before Adrian could answer. Sophie disappeared into a blur of double doors and blue scrubs and machines that began measuring things Daniel was too afraid to understand. A nurse stopped him. "Only one parent for now." Daniel froze. Parent. He opened his mouth, but Adrian stepped back immediately. "He goes," Adrian said. Daniel didn't even look at him as he entered. Tests, needles, scans. A doctor with grave eyes explaining internal bleeding, a ruptured ulcer, complications from the medication Sophie had been taking for months. because cheaper alternatives had stopped working. They needed surgery, quickly. It was serious, but they had caught it in time. Those words should have comforted him. Instead, they made his hands shake worse, because caught in time meant there had almost been another ending. He signed forms he didn't read, sat by Sophie's bed while she drifted in and out, whispering nonsense through fever and fear. Once, just before they wheeled her toward the operating room, she opened her eyes enough to mumble, "Daddy? I'm here." Her fingers found his sleeve. "The man in the lobby." Daniel swallowed. "Yeah." She blinked slowly. "Was that him?" He knew who she meant. He had always known this day might come, though he had prayed it never would. He nodded. Sophie stared at him through medication-heavy eyes. "He has my eyes." Daniel shut his own before they could betray him. "Yes," he whispered. "He does." After the doors closed behind the surgical team, the quiet became unbearable. He walked until he found an empty consultation room, shut the door, and bent over the sink with both hands gripping porcelain so hard his knuckles whitened. His reflection looked older than 36, more tired, the kind of tired that wasn't fixed by sleep because it lived in the bones. When the door opened behind him, he knew without turning. Adrian stopped a few feet away. For a while, neither of them spoke. Rain tapped against the tall window. Far below, the city moved on, indifferent. Finally, Adrian said, very softly, "I looked for you." Daniel laughed again. It came out bitter enough to bruise. "No, you didn't." "I did." "You sent lawyers." Adrian inhaled sharply, like that one landed exactly where it was meant to. Daniel turned then. Time had sharpened Adrian's face. He was still beautiful in the polished, dangerous way people like him always were, but there were new lines at the corners of his eyes. Sleeplessness lived there. Regret, too, if Daniel was honest enough to admit it. But regret was late. Regret didn't feed a child. Regret didn't sit up all night during fevers or explain why every school form only had one emergency contact. "I buried you," Daniel said. "Do you understand that? Not literally. Worse. I had to keep living like you were gone while you kept appearing on television, smiling beside people in tuxedos, opening hospitals, talking about compassionate care." His voice thickened. "Do you have any idea what that did to me?" Adrian's throat moved, but he didn't interrupt. Daniel kept going, because once years of silence crack open, they do not do it neatly. "When I found out I was pregnant with Sophie, you were already drifting. Your mother hated me. Your board hated me. Your father treated our marriage like a stain that had to be professionally erased. And you—" He stopped and swallowed hard. "You told me to wait, to trust you, to give you time." "I know." "No, you don't, because I did trust you. Like an idiot, I trusted you." Daniel stepped closer, voice breaking. "And then I woke up in our apartment to legal papers and a statement from your assistant saying you'd entered a private restructuring period and all communication had to go through counsel." Counsel, Adrian. After 4 years together, after vows. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, pain flickering over his face so nakedly it almost made Daniel angrier. "When I got to your office, security escorted me out. When I called, your number was gone. When I wrote to you, the letters came back unopened." Daniel's chest heaved. "So no, you don't get to stand here and tell me you looked." For a moment, Adrian just stood there, hands at his sides, carrying the accusation like someone who knew he had earned it. Then he said, "I was in a coma." Daniel stared. The room went very still. "A car accident," Adrian continued, 3 days after I told you I'd fix it. My father had arranged a meeting with board members and investors. I left furious. I don't remember the impact. They told the press I was overseas for recovery and kept everything internal to protect the stock price while they fought for control. He smiled, but it was a dead thing. When I woke up, 6 weeks were gone. I asked for you. My father told me you had left. Daniel's face didn't change, but something inside him shifted with nauseating force. Adrian took one step forward. He said you cleaned out the apartment, said you'd refused to take my calls, that you'd taken money and signed the separation documents. He had paperwork, signatures. Not yours, I realize now, but by then I was medicated, barely able to hold a thought together. Every time I pushed, they told me stress would kill my recovery. Then they moved me to Switzerland. My phone was monitored, my mail was screened. His voice roughened. By the time I came back to myself enough to stop being handled, you were gone. Daniel shook his head once, as if the movement itself might clear the words out of the air. No. Adrian's eyes filled. He didn't hide it. I found out the truth 2 years later. One of the old legal assistants confessed before she died. My father forged half the separation trail. My mother paid off building staff to say you'd moved out willingly. They buried us because I was about to inherit the company, and a husband from a working-class family didn't fit the image they needed. He looked wrecked saying it. By then you had vanished so completely, I thought maybe you wanted to be gone. Daniel leaned back against the sink because his knees no longer trusted him. He wanted to reject it, all of it. He wanted to say this was just another beautiful lie from a beautiful man trained to survive scandal. But Adrian wasn't performing. Daniel knew the difference. He always had. Adrian's lies, back when they existed, were polished, strategic. This was not polished. This was a man standing in the ruins of himself. I wrote to you for months, Daniel said, quieter now. From 3 different apartments. I kept getting them returned. I never saw a single one. Daniel pressed a hand over his mouth. There it was. The monstrous little possibility that ruins you more than certainty ever could. What if he had not been abandoned? What if he had been stolen? He sank into the nearest chair because suddenly the room felt too bright. I had Sophie alone, he said after a long time. 31 hours of labor and no one to call. I remember staring at the hospital ceiling, thinking I hated you so much I could stay alive on that hatred forever. It was easier than admitting I still loved you. Adrian made a sound then, something low and damaged. He sat across from Daniel, but not too close. Show me a picture, he whispered. Daniel looked up. Daniel should have said no. Of her as a baby, please. Instead, with numb fingers, he pulled out his wallet. There was a worn photograph tucked behind old receipts. Sophie, at maybe 3 months old, wrapped in a yellow blanket, glaring suspiciously at the world with huge gray-blue eyes. Adrian took it like it was holy. His whole face collapsed. He bowed over that tiny square of paper and cried without sound. Not elegant tears, not movie tears. The kind that shook his shoulders and made breathing look difficult. Daniel watched him and hated that his own eyes burned. That's the first time I've seen my daughter, Adrian said. The words hung there, unbearable. Daniel had imagined this reunion 1,000 different ways over the years. In most of them, he was colder, stronger, finished. He had never once imagined sitting in a hospital consultation room while the man he'd loved more than reason wept over a baby photo from 8 years ago. A knock came at the door. A surgeon stepped in, mask lowered, expression carefully controlled. Daniel was on his feet before the man even spoke. The surgery went well. Daniel's body nearly gave out from relief. She lost a concerning amount of blood, but we repaired the source of the bleed. She'll need monitoring in pediatric intensive care overnight, and we'll talk tomorrow about long-term management, but right now, she is stable. Stable. Daniel closed his eyes. Beside him, Adrian dragged a hand over his face and exhaled like someone who had been drowning. They were taken to the PICU half an hour later. Sophie looked impossibly small in that bed, surrounded by wires and beeping monitors, her skin washed pale under the lights. Daniel sat immediately and took her hand. Adrian stayed at the doorway, as if unsure what he was allowed to touch. After a minute, Sophie's eyes opened a little. She saw Daniel first, and a faint smile touched her mouth. Then she saw Adrian. Children were strange that way. They sensed earthquakes adults tried to step around. "Hi," Adrian said, voice rough. "I'm Adrian." Sophie studied him for a long second. "I know." Daniel glanced at her. She looked from one man to the other, groggy but still very much herself. "You're the one in the box." Adrian frowned. "The box under Daddy's bed," she murmured. "He keeps pictures there." Daniel closed his eyes in humiliation. Sophie kept talking because anesthesia had stripped her of tact. "Sometimes he cries when he thinks I'm asleep." The room went silent. Adrian looked at Daniel, and Daniel looked away because there are truths too intimate to survive direct eye contact. Sophie blinked slowly. "Are you staying?" The question was aimed at Adrian. He stepped closer to the bed. "If you want me to." "Daddy says people shouldn't promise things when they're scared." Daniel almost choked. He had said that to her after a birthday party where 3 classmates' parents never came. Adrian crouched carefully by the bed. "Then I won't promise what I can't prove. But I can tell you this, I am not walking away tonight." Sophie seemed to consider that. Then, satisfied, she let her eyes drift shut again. Hours passed. Nurses came and went. Machines kept their quiet vigil. The city outside sank into darkness. At some point, Daniel stood to stretch and nearly stumbled from exhaustion. Adrian caught his elbow automatically. The touch sent a shock through both of them. "You need sleep," Adrian said. Daniel gave him a flat look. "So do you." "I'll stay with her." Daniel opened his mouth to refuse, then stopped. Something in Adrian's face made refusal feel less like strength and more like punishment. So he sat back down. Near midnight, an older woman in an immaculate cream coat appeared at the end of the corridor. Even before Daniel knew her face, he knew the temperature of her presence. Evelyn Vale had entered. She aged well. Wealth usually did that. Diamonds at her ears, spine straight as a blade. The kind of woman who treated kindness like a currency too valuable for casual use. Her gaze landed on Adrian first, then Daniel, then the child in the bed. For a brief moment, something human flickered there. Then it was gone. "Adrian," she said, "the board is asking questions." Adrian didn't even stand. "My daughter just came out of surgery." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "You cannot make public declarations in the hospital lobby." "I already did." "Then contain the damage." Daniel felt sick. Because there it was, the old machine. The same machine that had crushed them before, humming to life with familiar efficiency. Evelyn finally looked directly at him. "Mr. Mercer." He rose slowly. "I think you've done enough," she said. Adrian stood so fast the chair scraped back. "No." The single word cracked through the room. Evelyn stared at her son, almost offended he had used that tone with her. "You don't understand the implications." "No," Adrian said, voice shaking now with a fury deeper than volume. "You don't understand the cost. I lost 7 years. I lost him. I lost her first steps, her first day of school. every fever, every birthday, because of you, because of Father, because you both decided your reputation mattered more than my life. Lower your voice. For what? Adrian laughed, and the sound was vicious. So we can pretend to be respectable while an 8-year-old nearly dies in the lobby of my own hospital because her father didn't look expensive enough? Evelyn paled. Daniel had never seen anyone speak to her like that. Adrian stepped between his mother and the bed. You will not come near them unless Daniel permits it. You will not contact legal. You will not spin this. And tomorrow morning, I am calling a press conference and an internal audit into patient denial policies across every facility we own. Adrian, you helped erase my family. His voice dropped then, lower and more dangerous. If you try to do it again, I will burn every protected secret this company has ever kept to the ground. Evelyn stared at him for a long moment, perhaps finally seeing not the son she could manage, but the man she had manufactured and then lost control of. Then her eyes slid to Daniel. I did once think you would ruin him, she said. Daniel's exhaustion burned away just enough for clarity. No, he replied. You ruined him. I just loved him. Something in Adrian's face shattered all over again. Evelyn left without another word. The room stayed quiet after that, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not helpless, not numb. The quiet after a storm finally chooses a direction. Around 3 in the morning, Daniel found Adrian standing alone by the vending machines down the hall, one hand braced against the wall. You okay? Daniel asked before he could stop himself. Adrian laughed softly. No. Daniel nodded. Fair. For a while they stood side by side under terrible fluorescent lighting, 2 men held together by an exhausted child and a history too heavy to lift in one night. I kept the ring, Adrian said suddenly. Daniel looked at him. Adrian pulled a chain from beneath his shirt. Daniel's wedding band hung there, slightly scratched, worn by years of skin and grief. Daniel had to look away. I told myself I wore it because I hated taking orders from ghosts, Adrian said. But that was a lie. I wore it because some part of me knew I was still yours. Daniel swallowed hard. Adrian. I don't expect forgiveness. Adrian's voice was quiet. I don't even know if I deserve to stand near you. I should have broken the world apart sooner. I should have found you. He stared down at the ring. But if there is any place in your life where I can still do good, let me start there. For Sophie. For you. Even if that place is 10 feet away and silent. Daniel studied him. 7 years of anger didn't vanish because one explanation finally made sense. Pain didn't become harmless just because it turned out to have another author. There were still empty chairs, unpaid bills, lonely birthdays. Nights Daniel had fallen asleep sitting upright because he couldn't afford to stop moving. But there was also this, a man who had been broken by the same theft, just in a different room. You can start, Daniel said slowly, by not trying to buy your way back in. Adrian nodded at once. Okay. No grand gestures, no lawyers, no media strategy disguised as apologies. Okay. And if Sophie asks questions, we answer them honestly. Age-appropriate, but honestly. Adrian's eyes closed briefly in relief. Okay. Daniel hesitated. Then, and you don't disappear. This time Adrian didn't answer quickly. He answered like a vow built out of scars. I won't. Morning came pale and thin through the hospital windows. Sophie was awake enough to ask for apple juice and complain that the gelatin tasted like a candle. Daniel nearly cried from gratitude over the attitude alone. Adrian sat beside her bed, awkward but attentive, listening as she explained, with deep seriousness, her opinions on cartoons, school uniforms, and the fact that her father made terrible pancakes but good soup. At one point, she held up her hand and stared at Adrian's fingers, then at Daniel's. "You both tap your thumb when you're nervous," she said. Neither man spoke. She seemed delighted by this evidence. "I knew it!" Later that afternoon, while Daniel helped a nurse adjust Sophie's blankets, Adrian stepped into the hallway to hold the press conference he'd promised. Daniel watched it on the room television with the sound low. No spin, no polished evasion. Adrian stood at a podium in the same suit he'd worn all night, looking wrecked and very awake. He announced immediate reforms, independent review, suspension of executives tied to discriminatory intake procedures, expanded emergency access regardless of insurance status. He spoke about accountability, but then his voice changed, became personal. "Yesterday," he said to a wall of cameras, "my husband and daughter were denied timely care in one of our facilities. That failure was not abstract. It was human. It was mine. And I will spend the rest of my leadership proving that this company deserves neither their pain nor the public's trust until we earn it." Daniel stared at the screen. Sophie, propped up in bed, looked at him. "He said husband again." Daniel let out a breath. "Yeah. Are you?" "Kids. Straight to the throat." Daniel sat on the edge of her bed. "It's complicated." "Complicated means adults made a mess and want cooler words for it." He laughed despite himself. "That is annoyingly accurate." She thought about that, then looked back at the television where Adrian was still answering questions, refusing to step around the truth. "I think he looks like he missed us," she said. Daniel followed her gaze. Adrian did look like that. Not just sad, not just guilty, hollowed out by absence. Like love had survived in him not as comfort, but as unfinished grief. And Daniel knew that look because he had worn it himself for years. That evening, after the cameras were gone and the doctor said Sophie would make a full recovery, Adrian returned to the room with 2 paper cups of coffee. He handed one to Daniel. Their fingers brushed. No thunder. No movie soundtrack, just warmth, real and slight and dangerous. Sophie was asleep. The machines around her were quieter now. Daniel looked at Adrian over the rim of the cup. "You know this doesn't fix anything overnight." "I know. I'm still angry." "I know." "I don't know what this is." Adrian looked at their daughter, then back at Daniel. "Neither do I. But for the first time in a long time, not knowing doesn't feel like losing." Daniel stared at him. Some loves do not return like fireworks. They return like breathing after being underwater too long. Painful first, then necessary, then impossible to imagine refusing. He reached into his pocket. For years he had carried his own ring in loose change and lint and denial. He didn't know why. Maybe for the same reason Adrian wore his on a chain. Some ties stay alive even after language fails them. Daniel set the ring between them on the blanket. Adrian looked at it, and his eyes filled instantly. "This isn't forgiveness," Daniel said. Adrian nodded once, unable to speak. "It's not a promise either." Another nod. "It's just—" Daniel glanced at Sophie, then back at the man who had once been the safest place he knew, before the world decided love was negotiable. "It's just me saying the door isn't locked." Adrian broke then, not loudly but visibly. He covered his mouth, nodded again, and bowed his head. When he finally looked up, he was smiling through tears. And Daniel realized something strange and aching and almost beautiful. Sometimes the most powerful moment in a life is not when love begins, or even when it survives betrayal. It is when wounded people choose, with full knowledge of what it may cost, not to become strangers again. Outside, the hospital kept humming. Phones rang. Elevators opened and closed. Somewhere in the city, people kept hurrying past each other, assuming they knew who belonged, who mattered, who was worth opening a door for. But inside that room sat a single dad who had knelt on a marble floor with blood on his shirt and terror in his hands. A child who had nearly slipped away, and a man powerful enough to own the building, yet powerless to buy back a single lost year. All he could do was stay. So he did. And sometimes, when life has taken almost everything from you, staying is the first miracle. If you were in this situation, what would you have done?